Good evening. I'm Anna Kalczyńska and you're watching World News Tonight, coming to you live from Warsaw. Symbolically and strategically, the Baltic states' dependence on Moscow is over. Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania have severed their ties to the energy systems of Russia and Belarus. Tomorrow they will permanently connect with Europe. More on this in just a moment, but first let's take a look at the latest headlines. Rare earth minerals for security guarantees. That's what the Ukrainians have to offer Donald Trump. Thousands Slovakians take to the streets of 50 cities to oppose pro-Russian Prime Minister. And Kosovo citizens head to the polls tomorrow amid economic problems and ethnic tensions. No spark left from the Baltics and Russia. For the first time in history, a decades-long energy partnership with Moscow is over. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia suspended all electricity flows from their connections with Russia and Belarus this morning. The networks of the three countries are currently operating in the so-called isolated island mode, relying on their own energy resources. Synchronization with continental European grids via a connection with the Polish grid is scheduled for Sunday afternoon. Our Lithuanian correspondent Yevgeny Rusakov has this story.
All three Baltic states are now free from Russian electricity and running on their own. The switch-off took place early this morning at 7:43 to be exact. Lithuania disconnected lines from Kaliningrad and Belarus. This news was confirmed by the Lithuanian electricity transmission system operators officials. Later, Lithuanian authorities confirmed that Latvia and Estonia also disconnected from the Russian system. The final cut-off took place at 9:09 Eastern European time. BREL, or the Baltic Power System Agreement with Russia and Belarus, formally expired at midnight on Friday. Now that the disconnection is complete, the countries are in an isolated mode, relying only on their own power grid until Sunday afternoon.
We have no links and no connections to Russia, Belarus and Kaliningrad. It essentially means that the energy system is fully in our hands, managed by us.
It provides security that Russia can no longer manipulate the frequency band. For us, this has been a risk for years, that Russia would want to play with the frequency band and destabilize the Baltics.
It's a historical moment. We're going in a system of Europe. It's a new start, it's a new beginning of the new system working. It's more independence, more secure, and what's most important, the system is fully in our hand, our responsibility.
Three Baltic operators, Lithuanian Litgrid, Latvian AST and Estonian Elering, are testing the resilience of the system to various disturbances and its readiness for isolated operation, including frequency and voltage stability tests. Once the work is completed, the Baltic states will be directly connected to Poland and the entire continental European synchronous area via the Litpol link on Sunday. Although Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia have not been buying Russian and Belarusian electricity for several years, they were still operating on the Russian IPS-UPS system, the frequency of which was centrally regulated in Moscow. Now this story is almost over. The next historic step will be taken tomorrow, and February 9th will become Energy Independence Day for all three Baltic states. Straight from Vilnius, Yevgeny Rusakov for TVP World.
Could it be that the land itself, so ardently defended by Ukrainian forces, could help them win the war? Here's the deal. Rare earth minerals in return for military aid. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is ready to negotiate with US President Donald Trump, offering billions of dollars worth of highly sought-after natural resource deposits. Kazimierz Łysiak reports.
Standing over a map of rare earth minerals, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy explained to Reuters journalists how many natural resource deposits are buried beneath the earth in Ukraine.
These deposits are priceless. It is huge amounts of money, huge. That is why we need to protect it.
But while Zelenskyy spoke to the two journalists, it's hard not to think his words were actually directed at someone else.
If we are talking about a deal, that's what the Americans want. Then let's do a deal. We're all for it. Let's do the deal.
The offer is on the table, and the ball is now in the court of US President Donald Trump, who once ironically called Zelenskyy the greatest salesman on earth. But Trump himself is also a businessman, and rare earth minerals are exactly what he wants.
We're telling Ukraine they have very valuable rare earth. We want what we put up to go in terms of a guarantee. We want a guarantee.
The only problem is, much of the rare earth minerals and other natural resources in Ukraine are located in the territories now controlled by Russia. And there is another country with a potential stake in all of this.
If there's no access for American companies because the Russians are allowed to stay there, then there's going to be access for Chinese companies. That's one of the reasons the Chinese are supporting Putin and risking more sanctions, is because they want access to those minerals.
Ukraine's minerals in exchange for the US's robust military aid is a deal both sides seem eager to agree on. These ores, while rare only in name, are crucial for modern industries.
They're often described as the vitamins or the spice of industry because they have, over the past several decades, they've enabled, through advances in material science, our technologies to get smaller and faster and stronger.
But Ukraine is not the only place where Donald Trump could get his hands on additional natural resources. The ice sheets of Greenland are also rich in rare minerals.
Greenland is also very rich, but still mining hasn't started because the government in Greenland is very hesitant about this and sees not only economic potentials, but also risks for their environment there.
Soon after taking office, President Trump expressed his wish to purchase or otherwise acquire Greenland, citing security reasons. The semi-autonomous island belongs to the Kingdom of Denmark, which has no intention of giving it up.
We're not going to allow that to happen.
The question is whether Donald Trump will offer it a carrot or a stick in his quest for rare earth minerals. Ukraine seems to have chosen the carrot before the stick was even put on the table. Kazimierz Łysiak, TVP World.
Ukraine says North Korean troops have returned to the front lines in the Kursk region. According to Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, hundreds of Russian and North Korean soldiers have been eliminated, adding that currently there are about 60,000 occupiers in Kursk. We are now moving to our correspondent in Kiev, Oz Katerji. Oz, good evening. What do we know about the situation in the Kursk region specifically, and what is the role of North Korean soldiers in the fighting at present?
Well, the situation in the Kursk region is still difficult, with the Ukrainians having launched some new offensives in that general direction. Now, we understand from various intelligence assessments made over the past few weeks that North Koreans hadn't been seen on the front line since early January, having sustained heavy losses. This is widely reported that the North Koreans have sustained heavy losses in fighting in the Kursk region. Now, President Zelenskyy put out a video statement on Friday night confirming that North Koreans had returned to those positions after having regrouped for what looks like a few weeks. This is a serious situation. You know, just because the North Koreans had moved away from the front line doesn't mean that they had given up their desire to assist Russia in this war. And it looks like they may be there for some time, as going away and coming back certainly indicates that they have no intention of abandoning their positions long term. So Ukraine is in a difficult position here, with Russia getting reinforcements from North Korea, while also receiving armaments from North Korea and Iran and various other places. So Ukraine is really in a position where they're looking for more support from their Western partners to try and counter this threat. They are, as I said, killing large numbers of North Koreans, we believe, in the fighting there, but still not enough to make enough of an impact that they leave the front line. So, you know, this is going to be an ongoing situation for Ukraine as we head into the spring. Definitely one to watch, and TVP World will be bringing you all of the latest on those developments. Right.
Oz Katerji, thank you so much, Oz. 100,000 people across 50 cities. Major protests are taking place in Slovakia under the banner "Slovakia is Europe." Demonstrators opposing Prime Minister Robert Fico's growing ties with Russia are calling for Slovakia to remain firmly aligned with the European Union and NATO. The protests were sparked by Fico's controversial meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin last December and have grown steadily ever since. Aisha Abachi has more.
Across Slovakia, thousands gathered on Friday in defense of the country's Western orientation.
Over 100,000 people that protested in Bratislava, 40 cities of Slovakia, plus international demonstrations in Brno, Prague, Paris, London, New York, and other cities.
The pro-Moscow inclination of Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has been agitating citizens.
Today, all free and peaceful but dissatisfied citizens must stand together so that we are not swallowed up by a Russian-style dictatorship in the near future.
We reject Robert Fico's policies. We reject this attempt by his government to take us closer to Putin's Russia.
According to the Prime Minister, however, the Georgian National Legion, a unit of the Ukrainian armed forces composed of Georgian volunteers, is behind a planned coup d'etat in Slovakia.
Based on the information available to us, ladies and gentlemen, we can confirm that, whether anyone wants to believe it or not, we have all the necessary intelligence on who's behind the protests in Slovakia, the Georgian National Legion.
Fico's rhetoric echoes that of Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, who also labeled anti-government protests in his country as foreign interference. It all started in December with the handshake that came as a blow to many.
The turning point was exactly the fact that he left to Moscow, and in a way he did it in a very secret manner. He did not inform anyone in the government. He did not inform the president. Suddenly appeared in Putin's office.
I want to live in Slovakia, which belongs to the European Union, and I don't want to live in Russia.
In a bid to continue receiving gas from Russia, the Prime Minister is feared to be moving further away from Slovakia's EU partners.
I think people fear that these moves by the Slovak government definitely bring us closer to Russia. I mean, we have not seen Prime Minister Fico visiting or being visited by any of the EU officials.
With crowds waving Slovak and European Union flags, the trajectory of the country's government remains to be seen.
And now we move to Georgia, where the government is getting closer to a one-party system. After breaking off accession talks with the EU in November, Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze now claims that one of his government's top priorities is to join European Union by 2030. Recent events tell us, though, that the actions of the ruling Georgian Dream are only pushing Georgia further away from its democratic future. Calls for new elections are ignored, and now the parliament has been gutted of opposition. Don Arleth reports.
Georgia is now much closer to a one-party system with literally no room for dissent. Instead of 150 sitting lawmakers in parliament, there are now just 101. Many seats will remain empty.
Now they basically gave up. They thought things would become normal, and like in 2020, the last parliament election, they eventually brokered a deal, and the opposition, which had a similar boycott then, they went back to their seats.
It is another step towards the consolidation of power. It means that the West is losing in Georgia, and Russia is determined to keep Georgia in its sphere of influence, and geography, by the way, is on its side.
One of the ways the united opposition protested what they called rigged elections in October was to resign from an illegitimate parliament.
We need to continue to protest. This is one thing, part of our strategy. The other thing is to achieve that they don't get legitimization, this new so-called parliament, because they don't have legitimacy from the people. They don't have legitimacy from all the four group opposition parties who actually won the elections, but they stole the elections.
It's been over 70 consecutive days of pro-democracy demonstrations in Georgia. The protests broke out in November after the ruling party, the Georgian Dream, cut off accession talks to the EU until 2028. The EU had cited irregularities in the October elections and called for them to be held again. Now the government is accepting these protest resignations, terminating the mandates of opposition MPs. Members of the Unity National Movement, Coalition for Change, and Strong Georgia, a total of 49 MPs, had their mandates terminated by 84 votes of the ruling Georgian Dream. The only opposition party that remains, the Gakaria for Georgia party, has just 12 seats in parliament.
Unfortunately, these people are still called the opposition. Today, their seats are empty, although it should also be noted that if they were sitting here today, these seats would be just as empty as they are now.
So why would the Georgian Dream wait several months to finally terminate the mandates of opposition MPs who resigned after the elections? And what might be the motive?
We have a situation where now the opposition figures, opposition politicians have lost their immunity, at least some of them. And I think that's one of the reasons why they have taken away the mandates is that we will now see that they are in for some arrests, and they will go after them if they show up in demonstrations or in any way do anything that GD see as an opportunity. The opposition politicians will be arrested.
With most of the opposition officially terminated and no new elections in sight, it's easy to see why Georgians are concerned that the government is one step closer to having a total monopoly on power. Don Arleth, TVP World.
Now to the citizens of Kosovo, the most EU-enthusiastic country in Europe. They will head to the polls tomorrow to elect their new parliament. For the past 4 years, the country's government has been led by Albin Kurti, the first prime minister to hold the post for a full term since Kosovo became independent in 2008. If the polls prove right, Kurti's party is expected to win again. Our Balkan correspondent, Paweł Trzaskowski, is on site and has more details.
The last political rally in the city of Peja, in the western part of Kosovo, has already finished ahead of the country's parliamentary elections to be held on Sunday. Elections in Kosovo, which is the youngest democracy in Europe. It used to be a part of Yugoslavia, but in 1999 the Kosovo War started. In a response to Kosovo Albanians' bid for independence, the Serb forces started brutally repressing them. Eventually, US-led NATO military intervention followed, forcing Serbs to withdraw. The conflict saw hundreds of thousands of Kosovo Albanians to emigrate, and the war-torn region saw heavy damages. The fights were especially brutal in the western part of the country, in cities like this one. In fact, 70% of buildings in Peja were destroyed, and in 2008 Kosovo eventually declared independence. However, not unanimously recognized. Most importantly, Serbia does not recognize it, but the US does, as well as most of the EU countries. In fact, Kosovo is the most pro-EU country in Europe, with more than 90% of its citizens supporting the EU accession. Kosovo hopes to become an EU member state one day and has even filed accession documents 3 years ago. In fact, all the major political parties in Kosovo support EU integration, and on Sunday, Kosovo citizens will go to the polls to elect their new parliament and, most crucially, the next prime minister. Currently, it's Albin Kurti who's heading the government. His Veteran Dossier party won in a landslide 4 years ago and is generally expected to win this time. Kurti's party is facing opposition from 3 other major political parties. The leader of Democratic Party of Kosovo, Bedri Hamza, is thought to be his major contender. On Sunday, almost 2 million eligible voters could cast their ballots to elect 120 MPs for the new parliament, and we will be here in Kosovo to cover these elections for you. From Peja, Kosovo, for TVP World, I'm Paweł Trzaskowski.
Exciting day for Kosovo. Now, Israel. 3 Israeli hostages have been released by Hamas in exchange for dozens of Palestinian prisoners in the 5th such swap since both sides agreed to a ceasefire. Our reporter Gabriela Fesnak has more.
The friends and families of the hostages anxiously gathered in front of the TV to watch their release. Eli Sharabi, Ohad Ben Ami and Or Levi were all captured during the October 7th incursion into southern Israel, which sparked the war in Gaza. The hostages were handed over to Red Cross personnel and were able to reunite with their loved ones shortly after.
It's so hard, it's really hard. He doesn't look well, but I'm sure he will now receive the right treatment and he will get stronger. We will all be there for him. It's mixed emotions, joy that is deeply mixed with sorrow. We are happy for that he is on his feet, that he is alive. We went through 491 days of not even knowing if he was alive.
A few hours after the hostages were released, Israel kept its end of the deal, freeing 183 Palestinian prisoners. The Palestinian Prisoners' Office said that more than 100 of the released prisoners are Gazans who were detained after the October 7th attack and held without due process. The list of released prisoners includes 61-year-old Jamal Al-Tawil, a Hamas politician and former mayor of the West Bank city of Al-Birah, who has spent nearly 2 decades in and out of Israeli prisons. Since his most recent arrest in 2021, he has been held without trial for allegedly organizing violent riots. 16 of the 33 hostages to be released in the first stage of the ceasefire have now been freed in exchange for more than 500 Palestinian prisoners and detainees. According to B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights center, more than 10,000 Palestinians are currently held in Israeli prisons. Over 70 people captured in the October 7th attack remain in Hamas's captivity.
Europe's Baltic nations have cut themselves off from the Russian electricity grid for the very first time in history, ending a precarious, decades-long energy partnership with Moscow. Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia will connect to the EU's power system tomorrow, roughly 20 years after joining the bloc and cementing a westward trajectory. We're joined now by Ivana Stradner, Research Fellow, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Good evening, madam. Good to have you.
Good
Thank
evening.
you for being with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, not only symbolic, but also a very important politically a process. So, what is actually the significance of this move?
So, Ingrid, as you have just mentioned, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania announced just recently that they have decided to couple their electricity systems that are very tied to Russia and Belarus. And I think this is the step in the right direction and actually truly divorcing from Russia's gas, because Moscow has been using gas to blackmail the West for a very long time, including the Baltic states. So this is definitely a final net to Russia. It was not probably an easy decision to make in terms of practically, but this was absolutely the right decision to do given Russia's continuous assault in Ukraine and the continuation of Russia's aggression over there. And of course, the Baltic states are very concerned about their own security. And they believe that Russia's war in Ukraine is not going to stay there, and that Russia will continue to also challenge the Baltic states. As a matter of fact, Putin doesn't need to roll on tanks and jets there. All he really has to do is to use its hybrid warfare activities there, which he has already been using. We already saw numerous sabotage activities in that part of Europe, but also elsewhere in the West, including in other parts outside of Europe. So this is something that Moscow will definitely not going to accept easily. And some people are already warning that Moscow, for example, might use certain maybe cyber attacks and certain other hybrid activities, basically to punish the Baltic states. But I'm sure that all those countries have made that calculation as well, and they're well prepared to defend themselves from Russia's assault that is below the threshold of war. Because Putin is a leader who will not right now dare to challenge militarily any of those countries, but he is also a trained KGB person who understands very well how to challenge the West below the threshold of war and to always use a plausible deniability. However, I also want to emphasize one thing, why this is extremely important. There are still countries in the West who have very, very close ties to Russia's energy. And Russia has been using energy truly as one of the most powerful weapons to blackmail the West. So I hope this is going to be also an important lesson to all those countries that are still energetically tied to Russia, that it's finally past time to divorce themselves from Moscow.
Thank you so much. You already answered my another question about what the Russian answer, potential response could be. So now let's turn our focus on the Ukrainian diplomatic efforts to end the war. Kiev is ready to provide the United States with Ukrainian rare earth element and underground LNG storage facilities in exchange for some security guarantees. Isn't it too early to make such deals?
So President Trump is considered to be a leader who loves transactions. He's a type of a leader who believes that there is no such a thing as friends and enemies politics. There is only one thing, such as interest. So who in that, transactional mindset, I am absolutely not surprised to see that Ukraine has offered also to offer something to President Trump that he can also use as an effort in negotiations with Putin. I also want to emphasize that indeed you mentioned rare elements, including, for example, lithium, that it's one of those tools. In the past, it was oil. Some people believe nowadays, people believe that it's lithium, that who controls lithium reserves actually can control the world. And we already see what has been happening in places in South America, and the efforts of China. So that's something that the United States, in particular the Trump administration, would be interested in terms of his transactional policies. I already, hear numerous stories here, and Russia and Trump's already promising to actually include more sanctions on Russia as an effort to end the war. So he would also probably use this Ukrainian effort to justify his decisions domestically towards his audience domestically.
And the only problem is that the areas rich in minerals have been taken by Russia right now, and they lie mainly in the Donbas area. So it is assumed acquisition of these lands were one of the reasons behind the Russian aggression in February 2022. Now, what could be the potential consequences of such negotiations or deal between the Ukraine and United States?
And indeed, that is going to be one of those hardships for the United States to enforce those efforts, but also as an asset in negotiations. As I mentioned multiple times on your show, I doubt that Putin wants to negotiate in good faith. Putin has not only ideological interests in Ukraine, but also strategic interests. And having access to rare minerals, as well as the rest of the control of waters, it's something that he deeply cares about. So that is also not going to be something that Putin will easily abandon. But I think it's too early right now to make any forecasts how the negotiations when it comes to the use of rare minerals will go. But I'm quite confident to say that it's not going to be easy.
All right, let's see what happens. And briefly, as we need to sum up, this is a very short interview this time. Slovakia, unlike previous demonstration, this time the week's unrest also rocked smaller rural towns that until now have been bastions of support for the ruling leftist populist Smer party. So the protests take on. Fico, the prime minister, claims he doesn't understand the reasoning behind those protests. Where do you see the potential of the situation to evolve?
Well, maybe he does not understand, but all of us, we do understand what's going on there, which is precisely his close ties to Moscow and his willingness to push away the country far from the European Union and NATO. And people are tired of his policies because they understand very well what it means to be aligned with Moscow, and they do not want to be part of that charade. So I do expect actually that more protests will take place. As a matter of fact, just look at what's happening in other countries such as Georgia. People in Hungary are also not happy with such decisions. So Putin is slowly losing his allies across Europe. So make no mistake, protests will continue. And
This is true. We see massive protests across Europe wherever the Russian interests are visible and growing. Thank you so much, Ivana Stratner, for this insight and for your expertise tonight. Research Fellow, Foundation for Defense of Democracies was our guest tonight. Thank you so much. And that's all we've prepared in this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you very much for watching. Please stay tuned to TVP World for more comments and more news.